Hey guys, Delta here. Today we are doing something a little bit different here. First of all, as you can hear, I am actually providing commentary this time. The footage in this video is sped up because otherwise this video would be over 50 minutes long and nobody is watching that. So the actual content of this video, I'm continuing my sort of world tour of the LR4 Power Frieza and Third Form Frieza rotation into every red zone stage, and today we are doing all Wicked Bloodline stages all at once. Obviously this rotation is not optimal, nor is it going to carry you through the red zone or something like that. I'm not saying that, but it's still good enough to be run. Don't let some dumbass cloud chaser on Twitter with shitty opinions tell you otherwise. Just because a unit isn't the best unit in the game anymore doesn't mean they are trash now all of a sudden. As for 4 Power Frieza, I actually think he does better in the Wicked Bloodline edition of the Red Zone than he does in the other ones. The reason for that is because these fights are for the most part so short that he keeps his passive for the entirety of them, so he doesn't need to stack with 18 key supers all the time to not get annihilated. Obviously, he is not gonna tank supers or anything like that, don't get me wrong, but he at least survives normal attacks, and that's all I'm gonna ask for. Now for the team, I'm using Frieza on, in my opinion, his best team, the Wicked Bloodline team. Under normal circumstances, I would probably run LR Final Form Cooler as a lead, so I can use AGL Turles or Tech Janemba or other good support units. The problem with doing that though is that LR Final Form Cooler is actually too strong. You cannot showcase units on his team because he just makes them look bad in comparison. Yeah, sure, 4 Power Frieza can do an Ultra Super for 8 million and then 2 12 key supers for 6 million damage each. Whoopee, amazing, wow, so strong. But it's hard to get impressed by that when on the very next turn LR Cooler drops an active skill nuclear fucking bomb 18 million damage and then follows it up with 5 super attacks, each of which doing like 10 million damage. If the enemy even survives all that. Yeah, sure, nobody is looking good in comparison. As for my team, my core consists of LR Metal Cooler, who is at 55%, LR Final Form Cooler, who is at 90%, SDR Cooler, LR 4 Power Frieza, and Third Form Frieza, who are all rainbowed, and then I'm just using whatever floating support fits best for that fight. Now for the Frieza fight, since it's so long, you can just stack up with 4 Power Frieza just fine and then just use items against the final phase, because obviously he doesn't do well against tech enemies, duh, no shit. But thankfully Third Form Frieza is in, so he can at least somewhat cover for him. He isn't gonna tank 4 Power Frieza for double digits obviously, but at least AGR 4 Power Frieza isn't just gonna be some sitting duck waiting to get one-shotted. Now, Red Zone Final Form Cooler. I feel like this fight isn't really talked about enough for how insane it is. Especially with this team, the first phase is just hell. That AGL cooler hits so hard, all the while you have to set up your rotations and you can't even bring tech units against him because guess what, the next phase is int and he's just gonna rip apart any tech unit you bring. Like, I think my metal cooler revives on turn 2 because he gets obliterated by AGL cooler. On the other hand, once you reach the int phase, the fight actually gets a lot easier. Like, LR Final Form Cooler is no longer up against type disadvantage, and he has had enough turns to actually build up his passive, and LR Metal Cooler has type advantage and can nullify Cooler's super attack. So actually, I found with this team, the first phase is much harder than the second phase. As for full power Frieza, he's okay. Like, since the fight is so short, I barely got to use him together with the third form Frieza, but I guess he still looked good enough. Mecha Frieza and King Cold. Do I even need to say anything about this? This fight is a complete joke. I think the devs have vastly overrated how difficult it would be to fight two enemies at once, so they made them not hit that hard compared to the rest of the red zone. Which is fine on paper, it makes sense, But the problem is, if your defense is high enough to tank one super from a weak enemy, then what does it matter how many weaklings you fight? You could fight 1 or 5. You're just not in danger whatsoever. Like, I'm sure my full power Frieza, who did like one or two 18 key supers at max, ate a super attack by Tech Mecha Frieza, survived, and I still no item this stage on my first try. Like, that's how little these enemies hit for. Like, yeah, sure, King Cold's ceiling is annoying and all, but that's really all there is to this fight. They're just complete pushovers. The Metal Cooler fight is interesting. It can either be super easy, decently challenging, or a complete nightmare to fight against, depending on the team you bring. The Cyclopean Guard hits so hard and is so tanky that you want to bring STR units, preferably those who can actually lower its attack and can do damage to it. The problem is that the second phase is, of course, AGL, and it hits insanely hard as well. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is Metal Cooler's constant healing, which means you need hard-hitting units or otherwise you will never win. In this run, I ended up with both STR Coolers on turn 1, which means the Cyclopean Guard got torn to shreds, and I got to AGL Metal Cooler on turn 2. And because of that, I could barely set up my rotations, so I only had like 1 or 2 turns at most, with both Friezas on one rotation. Luckily, full power Frieza actually put in some work, so the fight didn't drag out too long, and it wasn't too bad actually. to the Metal Cooler core fight. This fight gets utterly fodderized by the wicked Bloodline team. Like, yeah, the Metal Cooler army likes to double super, but it doesn't matter because the Metal Coolers heal so much and the team has so much attack lowering going on that these supers barely hurt. And the second phase gets utterly obliterated by Ella Final Form Cooler. Obviously, third form Frieza is by far the weakest link in this team in that fight. He gets destroyed, obliterated, smashed to pieces by the Metal Cooler core. Like, yeah, an int unit doesn't do well against the strongest physical boss in the game. Shocking, I know. But what I did, I just used a double Reese and blitzed this guy with Ella Cooler in like 2 or 3 turns. So it really didn't matter actually. Like I said, with this team, this fight is a complete joke. Well, that's really all I have to say about this. Let me know what you guys think, if my voice is absolutely unbearable to listen to, and see you all next time.